read. And, I wouldn't have known about a lot of this stuff, except, Darian West, my research partner, and the co-producer on Pennyroyal. We were trying to find information about James Shelby Downard, the conspiracy theorist I was talking about, and whether or not, Michael Hoffman, who's a controversial author, conspiracy theorist. He wrote this book on, like psychological warfare stuff. And William Grimstead, who, wrote The Rebirth of Pan as Jim Brandon. We were looking at that stuff, and we had found, I never thought about looking at the edits to a Wikipedia page, but Darian very much was like, let's start looking at who's changing and manipulating these things. And when you look at that, you could definitely see a lot of agendas, and then those agendas gave away certain people, right? Because they look like an anonymous user, or they're using, in the example in the second season, we find this Lynchian guy, and he's only ever edited Michael Hoffman's page, the Downard page, and then this writer named Harry Crews, who strangely sounds exactly like Downard. And so then we were like, is it possible that this guy's in on it? And then when you look at the edits to the Hoffman page, you realize that he's referencing, this Lynchian is referencing messages from Google where they're rejecting Michael Hoffman's they're censoring him, right? Because he's saying some pretty inflammatory stuff.
Right.
Well, the only way that he would be able to copy and paste the response from Google is if he received it himself.
Right.
It had to be Michael Hoffman, who was Lynchian, but it was great. It was just one of those things where I hadn't thought to look at the underlying edits. I hadn't thought to look at the actual editors, and because you can look at the editors and see what other articles they've edited, right?
Yeah.
And so some of these people, we even figured out that one of them definitely was Richard Spence, right? That wrote the Secret Agent 666 and wrote, with Walter Bosley did the Empire of the Will, the first book. Well, he's a huge Downard researcher, and he's really the first person to put out sort of a scholarly article. It was in Paranoia magazine, but I'm just saying it was very heavily cited, and he had very much investigated. I think it's called Finding or Searching for James Shelby Downard. And so we could see that he was editing the Downard page heavily, but then he was editing hundreds of history pages because he's a history professor, right?
Okay.
And it was like, this is definitely Spence. And so I, those kinds of things, looking at the underlying wiki wars, the things we're talking about with like Pittsburgh, instead of say 200 or 300 edits, there are 30,000 edits, and every day there's another 200 edits that are added to it. So things are just constantly in flux, and things that you just accept as true, like Pittsburgh.
Right.
If we went and looked at that, we would see literally tens of thousands of edits to that page.
That's
Why?
Crazy.
Right? Surely somewhere in there's concrete truth, but it's like truth is always shifting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who's so invested that they have that much time to continue editing that? Like,
dude, I know that's the thing. It's like, but they're shaping. They may not think it. They're probably not motivated by this directly, but in many ways, they really are shaping how the world is seen and what truth is. Because people today, I know I do it. Whenever I'm looking something up, or we have a question, or there's something comes up in a conversation, I Google it, and the first thing you see is the Wikipedia entry on it.
Yeah.
Right. And so depending on how that's been edited, then I'm going to say, see, right here, it says this. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's just that at that moment, the edits have sort of sifted into that, or coalesced into that,
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know. See, to me, that kind of stuff, looking at the paranormal and looking at these mysteries, with that kind of angle to it, right? Because I do think that a lot of things in the world are analog, right? That there's the thing, but then there's that thing sort of reproduced in another system or in another way. And so, I just think the way that data works and information systems and cybernetics, if we really think about things in those terms, we can reframe sort of our concepts of the paranormal or reality or, spirituality.
The other thing I was thinking when you were mentioning Minecraft is that there are people who have hacked Minecraft in ways like not going in and changing the code, but found little things that work and have done things with Minecraft that have never been planned.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the goal of reality. Like we're looking for those ways to hack it in a way,
Yeah. It's funny that we're talking about Minecraft too, because I just saw an article today about a library that's been created on one of the largest shared servers of Minecraft. And that library, people have collectively worked together to put all of these books and articles and specific pieces of content that have been censored in other countries with heavier censorship laws, especially in China, right? And so what they've done is aggregate all of those censored pieces of data and books and knowledge and put them in this library so that when someone in China or in some, in Afghanistan or some regime area, they're able to just look like they're playing Minecraft, but then they're able to sneak inside this library and read banned literature.
That is awesome.
Isn't that crazy?
See, and that's the good part of the internet.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are some of your personal synchronicities that you've had?
Oh man.
Like what would be some of the bigger ones that you've experienced?
So there's a lot of like really personal ones. But the big ones, definitely the Alexander Katerma stuff was one of the biggest synchronicities, just in terms of how it all lined up, how we found it. Here's a strange thing. that's a synchronicity that I don't know a lot of people know, but like with all the Hellier stuff, it was weird how the investigation that I was doing with Pennyroyal intersected with Greg and Dana Newkirk and the Hellier crew, and they had received information from this woman, and her first name was Amy. I won't say what her last name was, but after I'd spoken to Greg, we had he didn't tell me her last name. At the time, he just said he let me ask what her first name was and told me. And so then we set about trying to figure out who it was, because this was the woman that contacted them and said, there's a cult down here and you've got to come down here and all this crazy stuff's happening. And so whenever we looked it up after they left, we were able to figure out what her last name was. Well, the thing that was so crazy is that her first name and last name are the same as my wife's first name and last name. And they grew up on the same road, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was really strange. And it was just one of those funny things where, early on when we moved back, my wife's from here. When we moved down here, there were all these like cold checks at the dollar store in these different places that had her name on it. And I was like, look, you can't buy things here, jokingly. and then later, sure enough, 10 years later, I'm investigating all this weird stuff. And then, Greg and Dana and those folks end up coming down here because this woman has contacted them. And sure enough, that woman's name matches, my wife's name. And so that definitely was one of those things that even when I told them that, when I told Greg and Dana and the whole crew, they were blown away because they were like, that's too strange,
Yeah.
That's one of the bigger, like, personal ones. Recently, we found out a bunch of other things that probably will end up making it into the third season. There's always it's always weighing this like how much of the personal synchronicities do you reveal, just because there's got to be somewhat separation, between what's happening here and people, expressing the mystery to people. But definitely that was one of the biggest ones where it's like, it feels like the universe is kind of playing a practical joke.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there have been a lot of things like that in very personal ways, I'm like, is someone messing with me? Right. Is there something here that, when you think about the whole fact that 111, right, that this is, this town, again, I don't think Freemasons are, trying to rule the world or anything like that, but this town, Somerset, is a Freemason town. It was built by Freemasons. It's very clearly in the history, it's all, you can look all this stuff up. The first bank was funded from the National Freemasons Fund. The bankers were all Freemasons. The town's laid out based off the keystone of the lodge that's downtown. And then we also had a Freemasonic college here, I think one of like 6 in the country. And so, the identity of the town is heavily entwined with that. And so it was Lodge 111, which is, one of the older lodges in the U.S. And, there was the sheriff that was assassinated, Sammy Catron, right? He was also a Freemason in the lodge, and he went by the number 111, right? That was his patrol number. He also flew a helicopter everywhere, and the side of his helicopter had a 111 on it. And of course, he was assassinated at this fish fry. And that had always sort of rang strange to me. There were a lot of undertones of killing of the king sort of ritual. His father was also assassinated, and he was the chief of police, right? And, there are weird things like that, but this was another strange one. So knowing all of that, and then knowing that in Kabbalah and Gematria that 111, and also in Freemasonry, 111 is Aleph, 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 right? And so it's the 3 pillars, and it's seen, or it's translated as guardian of the gate, right? And so that was also strange because it's like Lodge 111, guardian of the gate, and then this is right on top of the Kentucky anomaly, right? This massive spike of geomagnetic energy. And so it's like, is this place here specifically because there's a gate here? But, again, those are sort of flights of fancy, right? But knowing all of those things, having researched all of those things, we were standing outside my studio that's above Jarfly Brewing, and we were out in the alleyway, and this guy had come from Chicago. He had seen Hellier. Pennyroyal wasn't out yet. We hadn't really disclosed a lot of our research. And the guy comes down, and he's asking me about where the underground UFO base is. And I'm like, dude, there's no underground UFO base. And he's like, I know there is, and I know you know where it's at. And I was like, I'm telling you, there's not one, but, he says, you're a disinformation agent.
Oh, of course.
And I'm like, there's nothing to disinform you of, this is crazy. So he and I were talking. I was being, really nice about everything and respectful and listening to the, his theories and stories. And I said, listen, I'll hit you up online, we'll talk some more. What's your username, or, you're on Reddit all the time, I'll hit you on there. And he says, my username is Mr. 111. And I was like, what? And everyone's standing there with me, and Darian was there, and Kyle that runs the museum here. And they both were like, what? Say that again? He said, yeah, I'm Mr. 111. And he opens his shirt up, and he's got this giant medallion hanging around his neck that says 111. And he had been using Mr. 111 as his username for like 15 years. And I said, do you know that the Freemason Lodge behind you is Lodge 111? And he was like, what? I was like,